Legislative Luncheon 2013. I would first like to thank our sponsors. Bridgewater Savings, our premier sponsor, thank you so much. They really stepped up, as they always do. We appreciate it so much. I want to thank our corporate sponsors, Claremont Companies, thank you. Harbor One Bank, J.K. Allberry Insurance, Rockland Trust, thank you. Taunton Federal Credit Union. Let's have a round of applause for them. I hope you know that without their support, we could not offer programs such as these. So we thank you from the community and from the chamber. We have several town officials here today too, so I'd like to go through that. Give me a wave, okay? So people know who you are. So after lunch and after our guest speaker, you have an opportunity to meet with them and talk with them. Representative Keiko Oral. Representative Susan Gifford couldn't be here, but she's represented by Heather Leos. Is that right? Is Tom Calder in the room? Well, he's supposed to be here. We can talk about him. Charles Cristello, Town Manager of Middleborough. Alan Crawley, Selectman Middleborough. Leilani Dalton, Selectman Middleborough. Ruth Joffroy, Planning Director Middleborough. Jane Cutsey, Office of Economic and Community Development, Middleborough. Say that fast 3 times. Scott Bellamo, Selectman, Lakeville. Alan Slavin, Selectman, Wareham. We have a few other people here. Sam Richter from Middleborough Gas and Electric Department. Is Paula Fisher here? Paula Fisher from Plymouth County Development. Thank you all for coming. Now, Senator Martin Chico called me yesterday and said, why did you plan this when the Senate wasn't in session? And he personally said he was sorry he couldn't be here because he says he's a good friend of you, Generali, so he wanted me to make sure that to let everyone know that he's sorry he couldn't be here. I'd like to introduce the legislative committee who put this event together. We have our chair, John Oliveri Jr., Claire Cole from Claremont Companies, Wilfred Dufilly, Willie, and Wayne Perkins, who couldn't be here. I also want to thank a friend of the event, Julia Dixon from Henry says Doggy Daycare. Where are you, Julia? Thank you for your support. Our board members that are here, Tim Hollick, George Randall, Julia Dixon, Glenn Sherman, Barbara Finkelstein, John Wainwright, Tori Sylvia, Kathy Cornelius, and our chairman, Frank McDonald, who you will hear from very briefly after lunch. The Cranberry Country Chamber of Commerce adopted a motto or tagline, if you will, about 2 years ago, which is power of place, power of community, and power of voice. And this is how it works. Rep Oral called about a month ago and said the software service tax, we need to talk about that. We want it repealed. So she called 2 chambers. Rep O'Connell was there. We had some IT people, owners of IT companies, and 2 chambers. And we talked about it, and she called me about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, and said it was repealed. And it's on its way. On its way to being repealed. But what we did was, she gave us who to contact. We put out on our websites 2 our numbers, who to contact, and who to help get moving and along. So it's on its way. So that's how Power of Voice works. Prior to our guest speaker, and after lunch, we do want to, we placed the town officials and legislators with you so you could all get together and talk together with the community. But we're inviting you to stay around and talk with anybody you'd like to, give your support, or if you have some concerns. The chamber, okay, I think that's about it. I want you to enjoy your chicken steak and chocolate cake, and we'll see you after lunch.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, my name is Frank McDonald. I'm the chairman of the Cranberry Country Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank all of you for coming here to our legislative luncheon. A special thanks to Jim and our distinguished guest representatives in Boston. And yeah, there's one thing that we, by the way, too, I want to thank Dennis Barbado and the Boston Tavern for hosting this event. I kind of have mixed feelings about that because he came up to me and he said, "Hey Frank, the Yankees were eliminated last night, weren't they?"
They were.
Okay, you're gonna pause. Then I told him, I said, "Listen, you got it wrong. I'm a Mets fan, and I remember 1986." Anyway, we can't wait to hear. And it's just the second time today I've been warned to be brief, so I better be brief. But we're here to hear Jim's top 10 reasons of the gridlock. And I guess if there's a message that we can send as chamber members and representatives, if you will, is that, we'd like that gridlock, if you will, to stop. We'd like people to kind of get, down to business, don't dig in their heels, and really make things move forward. Because that's good for everybody. To put on my white hat for a second, we like to think that we're all one and we're working towards a common cause, and I think that's what we have here. We have a serious momentum in this lovely, in this area here, and I think we just want that message to be brought back to Boston saying, listen, we need things done across the whole state, we need things done in our area, and if we compromise, we can make things happen. So, with that said, I want to introduce John Oliveri, who is on our chamber board.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. I'm going to read off the script so I don't babble on, I promise. First of all, again, as you've already been told, thank you all for coming to our legislative meeting, luncheon this afternoon. We have a great speaker who I'm going to introduce in a second, but I also want to remind you, as Valerie pointed out, after Jim's done talking and taking questions, please stick around, network, more importantly, mingle and talk to the elected officials who are here. Let them know your thoughts on what you would like to see happen, whether it's in your local community or up at the State House. This is your opportunity. So, having said that, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker today, Jim Browdy. Jim is, I'm going to give you a little more info. Just a little bit, not a lot. Jim has been in the public spotlight for a good number of years and is probably best known to most of us as host of Broadside with Jim Browdy, which airs nightly on New England Cable News. He also hosts a daily radio show with Margaret Egan of the Boston Herald, and I believe you've been doing that for probably 14, 15 years at this point. In addition, Jim has moderated numerous state, congressional, and gubernatorial debates over the years, along with interviewing a number of our country's former presidents. Although Jim has been in the public spotlight for quite some time, let me assure you he wasn't born behind a microphone or in front of a camera. Prior to TV and radio shows, Jim ran his own small business, started his legal career, yes, he's an attorney, as a legal services lawyer in the South Bronx, has published a magazine, and served as a Cambridge City Councilor. So without further delay, Jim Browdy.
I have a torn meniscus if people are saying, why is he walking like that? Thank you very much, John. I'm thrilled to be here, in great part because John will stop emailing me every day, which is... I have some trepidation being here. I am from Cambridge, and I must admit, I don't travel very well beyond 495, but I made it. I'm glad to be here. As you said a couple of minutes ago, it's billed as a speech. It's not a speech, it's a list. I put together a list of 10 things that I think are important, you should care about, you might not care about, but I'll be fairly brief. But I have to say, in the spirit of full disclosure, which is a spirit I embrace as infrequently as possible, I am great on the rear view mirror stuff. I'm not so good on the Nostradamus. kind of thing. Let's go. 2012, at different times, I predicted that Rick Perry, Newt Gingrich, or Herman Cain would be the Republican nominee for President of the United States. Obviously, that was wrong. But I have to say, in my own defense, I never suggested that Michelle Bachmann would be. And in part, my sense, I was trying to think, why didn't I? And I guess when you're married to a guy, as she is, who has a living of trying to convert gays to straights and bears a stunning resemblance to Chaz Bono, you're probably not going to be elected president of the States. In any case, let me get, this is a list, and I'm going to try to speed through it because I was saying, John, I'm much more interested in answering questions than I am in pontificating, because that's probably going to be what you're more interested in. I'm going to make some people happy right away and others unhappy. Number one party rule in legislatures, whether it's Massachusetts or anywhere else, is an unmitigated disaster. I'm not a Republican kind of guy. I'm not so crazy about a lot of the Democrats either, but I'm a huge believer in small democracy, small d democracy. If you don't fear for your job, it's human nature, the likelihood that you're going to listen to the people who hire you, your constituents, is diminished dramatically. Now, you might probably saying to yourselves, well, yeah, two-party rule is working great in Washington. No, that's a disaster too. But it has potential that I think one-party governments don't. I don't know if you've seen the polling on Washington. Have people seen the most recent congressional approval? 79% disapprove, 20% approve. And while some people I talk to say 79 is really high, that's not what I think about. I think, who are the 20% who think that Congress is doing a good job? Now, let me tell you how bad this imbalance is. The good news is, if you believe in two-party government, the Republicans in the House of Representatives in Massachusetts in the most recent election doubled their numbers, roughly, to about 30. That's the good news. The bad news is it is 30 out of 160. There's worse news. In my opinion, one of the most creative, innovative legislators, former judge, former chief counsel to Mitt Romney, former chief counsel to the Scott Brown for U.S. Senate campaign, Dan Winslow, is retiring from the legislature in 3 days to go become a corporate counsel. Bob Hedlund, a very innovative Republican state senator, told me on the radio the other day that sooner rather than later he's going to leave the legislature. You know what that means? When they go, there will be 31 members out of 200 in the state legislature who are Republicans. 2 senators out of 40, 2 out of 40 are going to be Republicans. So I don't care, even if you're the most dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, that kind of imbalance on Beacon Hill, no constitutional officers who are Republicans, no member of Congress who's a Republican, is a real serious problem if you believe in small d democracy. Best line, by the way, and the other problem Republicans have in this state, which is not of their own making in most cases, is the nutbags on the federal level, for lack of a better expression, when they do horrible things, it trickles down. Matt Dowd was the genius behind the Bush-Cheney campaign in 2004. He had the best line after Mitt Romney lost the presidential election. His line was, the Republican Party, I want to make sure I get this right, the Republican Party is a madmen party in a modern family America. And I think that says it perfectly. Now, the only piece of good news on the two-party front, I don't know if it's going to lead to anything, you may have not read it in the last couple of days, last day, Gabriel Gomez, who I think did a pretty decent job against Ed Markey for first-termer, has come to his senses, wrote an op-ed that was online in the Globe yesterday. He had opposed assault weapon ban, he had opposed a high-capacity magazine ban. He said in an op-ed yesterday, his wife Sarah has been lobbying him forever. She was right, he was wrong, he switched his position, and I believe will make him much more electable in Massachusetts. That's number one. That's the longest, don't worry, it's not going to go for a week. Number 2, the governor's race. It's pretty much settled. I interviewed Charlie Baker last night on television. You're all supposed to shake your head as if you saw it. Thank you. Whether you did or not. Oh, it was great, Jim. Well, what'd you like most about it? Oh, I don't know. In any case, Charlie was on the new Charlie Baker, as he calls himself, because the old Charlie Baker wasn't who he really is, that sort of thing. Democratic field is pretty well set. The only, I think, possibility is the former mayor of Somerville, who is a member of Congress, Mike Capuano. It's unclear. The conventional wisdom, it's going to be a Coakley-Baker thing. I don't know if conventional wisdom is right. Here's my view on Baker's candidacy, and this is not either an endorsement or a non-endorsement. In my view, with all due respect, if Charlie Baker loses this race, the GOP in Massachusetts is RIP. It is over. This is a hugely important race. And again, if you're going to support the Democrat, that's fine. I'm just saying, as a relatively objective observer, his race and his ability to pull in other Republicans, I think is huge. If you want to ask me about the current governor, whether he's going to run for president, we discussed that on the radio yesterday. You can ask me that question later. Back to Charlie Baker, though, the problem, and this gets back to my first point, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer at your luncheon. It's one thing to win. It's another thing to be able to govern. And every time I say that to a Republican, they say, well, look at his mentor, Bill Weld. I said this to Charlie last night on television. What's the major difference between Weld and Baker? One is me, I'll explain that to you in a minute, and two is that Weld had a veto-proof state senate. So it meant if he did something, he could count on the Republican senators to support him. He can't count on a state senate with 2 Republicans to support him. Now the reason I said me, as self-servingly as it sounds, in 1990 I led the opposition to what would have been the single largest tax cut on the ballot in United States history. It was called Question 3. I did it with Barbara Anderson from Citizens, well, not with, on the other side of Barbara Anderson from Citizens for Limited Taxation. Bill Weld had the best of both worlds. He supported the tax cut and he lost, which meant by the people voting 60-40 against the tax cut, he got to spend the $1.5 billion that he said he wanted to repeal, so in a perverse way, he benefited from that loss. Number 3. Last thing on this. If anybody speaks to Charlie Baker, since I can't give him advice, here's the most important thing he should do to win. He should echo the exact same words that Mitt Romney used when he won the governor's race, talking about the gang of 3 on Beacon Hill. He shouldn't do it in an angry way, but if you, I don't know who's committed or uncommitted in terms of political parties, if you're in the middle, and you're not in love with a Democrat, maybe I like him or her, but I'm not crazy about them. If someone says to you, don't you want a little balance amongst the leadership? Don't you want, if there's going to be a Democratic Senate president, a Democratic speaker, don't you want some balance there? If I were a voter in the middle, I'd find that, and I thought the 2 candidates were close, I'd find the gang of 3 argument pretty compelling, and I think it helped Mitt Romney beat Shannon O'Brien. 3, speaking of gang of 3, it's now the gang of 4. If you're going to engage in legislative work on Beacon Hill, there are 2 Senate presidents. I don't know if people know this. Terry Murray is the sitting Senate president. There's another Senate president. His name is Stan Rosenberg from Amherst, who in this oddest thing ever, essentially got enough votes to be elected when she leaves in a year, so that he's the Senate president-elect, sort of, informally. And when you go to lobby, I'm going to talk about lobbying in a minute, you really have to lobby both of them. Because he's the one that senators are going to have to worry about come a year from now, and she's the one, you know what I mean? They have to worry about now, so in any case, that matters. And it matters a lot, and it doubly matters because Beacon Hill has become more autocratic through the years, and less people like state reps and senators who are around here fight like crazy. The reality is those 3 people make decisions, and everybody else is sort of there for the ride. Number 4, my mother used to say my personal motto should be borrowed from Alice Longworth Roosevelt, who once said, if you don't have anything good to say about anybody, come sit right next to me. Well, that is generally my approach to the world, but I'll make an exception for people who run for public office. I think I'm sitting with at least 3 of them at the table there. We love to excoriate public officials. It is one of the worst and most difficult jobs when all people do is scream at you. The vast majority of people who serve have lives, have families, have other things, and they work like dogs. And even if it turns out you don't agree with where they are on a particular issue, if they treat you with respect, and all you're entitled to is a fair hearing on things you care about, not a particular outcome, then you should treat them with respect as well. I mentioned to my table mates here, I know a little bit about that because I ran for the city council in Cambridge in 1999, and unfortunately I won. And I served 1 term and then didn't run for re-election. And the weird part, and the great part, I think, and I think they may share this perspective, when you're a constituent, and yet, more often than not, and it's horrible, there are times when you have contempt for a public official or 2. I became a public official, and then I had a contempt for the same constituents I used to be sitting next to in all these meetings. You get to see both sides of the equation, and I'm really telling you, show respect for people who've chosen to give a piece of their life for public service. If it's not purely about resumes and personal ambition, they really deserve your respect. Number 5. So now that we know a little bit about the playing field, how do you affect change? How do you make things happen? I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. The first way you're going to say, I don't need him to tell me this, is relentless lobbying. 2 examples. 1, anyone ever heard of Ron Bersani? Ron Bersani is a guy who runs a place that helps blind people. That's what he's done most of his life. He also had a granddaughter who was her young teens, Melanie Powell, who was killed by a drunk driver maybe 15 years ago. He had never lobbied a legislator in his whole life. He had no desire to get involved in this. He was crushed by the loss of his granddaughter. And he walked up to the State House almost every day for close to 10 years with a notebook that I have seen with a picture of his beautiful grandkid on the cover, and suffered through the pain of having to talk about this kid he loved so much because he wanted to make a change so that there wouldn't be another Melanie Powell or another Melanie Powell after roughly 10 years and a pathetic situation where leaders in the legislature who were opposed to it, mostly defense lawyers, were on the front page of the Globe when the vote was happening, sipping drinks by a pool in Portugal, and then had to fly back out of embarrassment to vote for this thing. He got Melanie's Law, which made dramatic changes in drunk driving. Why did he do it? He's no better lobbyist than anybody else. He was relentless. He decided, I care so much about my granddaughter and other people's granddaughters that I'm going to do this every day till I drop, and he did. Other end of the spectrum is the tax thing. I can't think of anything. Look at the smile on her face. You want to stand up and smile? Yeah, there. Thank you very much. I can't think of a situation. I've been in and around Beacon Hill for maybe 25 years. I can't think of a situation where 3 leaders of the legislature, meaning in this case the 3 Democrats, embraced a particular position, a tax in this case, and then 2 months later embraced the repeal of the tax. It's not because, I don't mean to criticize the 3 of them at all, by the way. I mean, in many ways, having an open mind is a wonderful thing. Having an open mind is a wonderful thing. My favorite Dan Quayle quote, this is not what I was going to say. Remember Dan Quayle? Dan Quayle is speaking to the United Negro College Fund. Remember their motto is, a mind is a terrible thing to waste? He's speaking to them, he says, this is a quote, verbatim, I'll never forget. He said, what a waste it is to lose one's mind. or not to have a mind at all. And the true story. In any case, that's true. I can't think of a situation where legislative leaders in Congress, the state legislature, whatever it is, switch their positions as quickly as they did here. I think most of the tech leaders, with all due respect to people who dropped the ball and weren't loud enough up front, the Republicans were, but as I said to Charlie Baker last night, Republicans don't like any taxes. So while it's true they deserve some credit here, what happened is afterwards, when they realized what the impact was, they did everything. You were talking a couple of minutes ago about getting letters out. It mattered, and that's what turned this thing around. Tech leaders, legislators, including some Democrats, mostly Republicans were leading it apart, convinced the 3 leaders that they had to go through what leaders don't like doing, reversing themselves publicly. So it's relentless lobbying really works, even though sometimes, like in the case of Ron Bersani, it takes a long time. Second way to get things done, and I hate to even mention this, but I'm trying to be fair. We're one of 25 states that allows people to make laws, repeal laws, those sort of things on the ballot. And that's how I got started my involvement in politics in Massachusetts, doing ballot campaigns against citizens for limited taxation. Barbara Anderson and I will tell you more stories about our relationship in a couple of minutes. The power of ballot campaigns is this. Not so much going to the ballot and winning, which is torture and really expensive. But the reality is, it is not as hard as people want you to believe to collect the 60,000 signatures to get a question on the ballot. And the beauty is, if you get the 60,000 signatures, and I assume you know, or 60, whatever it is, you don't have to support the question. You just have to support the people having a chance to vote on the question. If you get this, and I've done this on tax questions in the 90s, the business community has done it on other questions in the last couple of years. When you have a ballot question hanging over the legislature, you have huge leverage in terms of the ability to cut a deal with people there. Because they don't want, when you engage in direct democracy, which is the term of art for voting on laws in the ballot, you're basically saying representative democracy on Beacon Hill is not working. They don't like that. So if you have this ballot campaign here and have the ability to go to the ballot and let the people speak, trust me, you have stunning amount of leverage on Beacon Hill. Number 6, and this is the third element of a successful effort, the media. I know a lot of you have utter contempt for the media, but let me say something that I hope doesn't come off as arrogant, but true. I speak to more of your customers, clients, patients, and everything else every day than you do in a year. I do. It's not just me, I don't mean me, I mean the generic me. The newspaper writer, the TV anchor, the radio talk show host, we do. And when you have such contempt for how the media treats things, and I have a lot of the same feelings, even though I'm in it, that you do, you lose a colossal opportunity. Deval, we were talking, John and I a minute ago, but Deval Patrick does an hour on our radio show every month. And you know what happens, and this is the relevant part for the importance of using the media, every single time he's on, we get emails from people who say, I didn't vote for him, I'd never vote for him, I don't agree with him on the issues. I love the fact that a high elected official in the state has the courage and respect enough for the voters to be willing to take questions from just average people. It's huge. The media is huge. How many people here have ever called a talk show? That's not horrible, it's not great. How many people have ever written a letter to the editor? That's a little bit better. I'm telling you, it matters. It really matters. You know, most talk show hosts, radio talk show hosts, and TV are conservative. All my liberal friends are, if you'll excuse the expression, bitching all the time. Oh, they control the airwaves. Oh, this one. Do you ever call a radio show? No. Do you ever call a reporter? No. As a reporter myself, most days we are desperate for stories. If you begin a relationship with me on a day when you're not selling a story, because I know when you're selling a story, you're doing it self-interest. But you start a relationship with me and you invite me to an event, even if I don't come. Well, I say that was sort of selfless. And then you continue to begin to have a relationship. There is not a week that goes by that I don't call somebody who has been in touch with me, following up on something they said, because I don't have anything to talk about that day on the radio or TV or not enough, and said, refresh my memory about that issue you were doing, and more often than not, we'll do it. It really matters. Letters to the editor matter. Calls matter, all that sort of stuff. Number 7, the context for all of your lobbying and work. And I have to finish the sentence before you get angry here. This is depressing, but true. The public is wildly uninformed. Not uneducated, not uncaring, but uninformed. And the reason they're uninformed is not, as I say, because they don't care, it's because they're busy. They have kids, they have jobs, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. They have responsibilities in their communities. So much stuff is happening, but in many cases, they just don't know what the issues are, or where I mean, look at the turnout, the pathetic turnout in Boston for that mayoral runoff. 30% of the people voted, which to me, after the first time as not an incumbent on the ticket in 20 years, is a disgrace. An absolute disgrace. But I like to say it's because people are so busy, whatever. Let me give you examples if you're saying to yourself, well, that's a little arrogant. They're not uninformed. 1990, when I was doing that ballot question with Barbara Anderson, I remember to this day, we were on RKO Radio doing with Ted and Janet. I don't know if you remember them. They were great. Ted O'Brien and Janet Jagali. It was a great show. We're doing a debate on the station. An older woman calls in and is complaining about potential cuts in senior care, in elder care. And I said to her, this is verbatim, I'll remember it till the day I die. So I assume, madam, you're voting against the tax cut. And her response was, what do taxes have to do with it? Let government pay for it. And while you say to yourself, people can't be, of course they can. I mean, it's a basic civics lesson that some people don't have time. You saw signs at the Tea Party rallies, don't let government take over my Medicare. That was one of my favorite signs of them all. But the best example, and I only repeat this because it's my favorite of all time, there was this Minneapolis think tank in 2005 or 2006 that surveyed 1,000 people, 1,000 Americans. And they asked them, how many of you can name all 5 members of the fictitious Simpson family? 220 of them could name all 5 members. And I'm sure most of you can. You're saying to yourself, of course you can. One out of that same 1,000 could name all 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. One. And by the way, all of us are saying, let's see, it's press, it's religion, it's speech, it's assembly. The one that everybody forgets. Does everybody know what the fifth one is? Petition the government for redress of grievances. I'm not saying it's not hard. 220 know all 5 members of the Simpson family. One of them knows all 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. There's something wrong somewhere. Okay, number 8. So you have all this expertise. You know how to lobby. You decide you're going to start using the media. What are the most important areas in my estimation where you got to show your clout? Number 1 is the cost of higher education. It is huge. We don't grow much corn in this state. We grow brains. But college on every level is so thoroughly unaffordable. It is unbelievable. I wrote an op-ed in the Sunday Globe magazine, I hope somebody saw it a couple of weeks ago, talking about the insane, embarrassing debate in Congress about interest rates. Oh, but they're doubling to 6.8%. We got to get them back to 3.4 and end up at 3.8. I did a little research. I call it Congressional Research Service. After this orgy of self-congratulations on Capitol Hill that they had reduced the interest rate to 3.8%, guess how much money the average student saved every month on the average loan based upon that reduction in interest rates? Anybody want to guess? $6 a month. And as I wrote in that piece, if Bill Clinton was speaking about it, he'd say it's the principal, stupid. And I don't mean principal like, I mean PAL, meaning it's the cost of college that is completely out of control. The legislature this time, by the way, after years of allowing tuitions and fees to raise its, go up to state colleges, because of the appropriation this round, there's a freeze, which is a very good thing. It's a first step in the right direction because it matters in a huge way. I know there's a community college issue here. I think is it Massasoit that's got a branch in Middleborough? Governor Patrick proposed this initiative. It was very controversial, I think in January of last year. He called it coordination of community colleges. A lot of the presidents, 15 presidents, didn't like it. They thought it was centralization. They're sitting down. He's put together this trustee advisory committee. There was an additional appropriation. He made the point last year that I thought was brilliant. When he announced this, I think in his State of the State, there were 240,000 unemployed people looking for work in Massachusetts, yet there were 120,000 jobs available. And the disconnect was the 240,000 people didn't have the skills to do the 120,000 jobs. So he sees, as do I, community colleges as the place where there's got to be coordination to ensure that young people and not so young people get the skills to fill the jobs that are available. So the cost of higher ed, in my opinion, is the single most important issue that faces all of us. And by the way, if you didn't read my piece, which obviously all of you didn't, because you all have blank stares on your face, it's the next mortgage crisis. And if you think it isn't, you're fooling yourself. It's $1 trillion in debt. Kids and their parents. I know parents who I interviewed for this thing who've put off retirement, who have changed their lifestyle because they want to foot part of the bill for their child's education because that's how they were brought up. Is you have to, it's obscene, and it's got to be dealt with on the state and federal level. And the second, and this is number 9 of 10, the second thing where there's got to be huge focus, and I know this matters a lot down here, is the transportation infrastructure is huge. Everybody knows the story with the governor proposing $2 billion in $2 billion in taxes for education and transportation infrastructure, $1 billion for transportation. The legislature gave him $500 million in new taxes, tolls to make up another couple of $100 million. He says the tolls are going to come down. I'm going to lose that money. And then when you add the tech tax, that's another $161 million, whether you love the tax or not. Essentially, the billion that he says he needed is now down to somewhere, even if the rainy day fund replaces it for 1 year, that $1 billion for transportation infrastructure is probably down to $400 million, something like that. You may say he asked for too much, but that's fine. I'm just saying that's what he said. Not that he wanted it, he needed it. Knowing I was coming here today, I asked him on the radio yesterday about something near and dear, I know, to the hearts of a lot of you people. You know half the story I'm about to tell, but not the other half. I asked him, so what's the deal with South Coast Rail? It seems to me if you're losing all this money, something's going to have to go, and what's going to go is a $1.8 billion expenditure on South Coast Rail. Well, and by the way, a few days before that, I'd spoken to Bill Strauss, who's the chair of the Transportation Committee, who said, I guarantee you, this is going to happen. It may not happen quickly. Well, Deval Patrick, he told a great story. He told a great story when he's at the event announcing that the Army Corps of Engineer thing the other day, the environmental thing, what is it called? Hamahawk Swamp, whatever it is. Whatever they, I got it wrong? Well, it's close. I know it starts with English. Whatever it is. That thing was dealt with. He says a guy comes up to him. He's telling the story on the radio yesterday that, you know, the track, I guess, or the right-of-way has been not used in 55 years. I think I'm pretty close. A guy walks up to him wearing like a tea hat or something, who is the ticket collector. How great a story is this? It almost makes me cry. On the last train that used those tracks 55 years ago today, and he said, Governor, my one remaining wish in life is to still be here when that train runs to the South Shore. It's really great. So in any case, here's what I asked them on your behalf. You know, is this thing going to happen? This is almost a quote. I actually transcribed it myself. Transportation financing is not adequate for our needs. Jim, you call it what I want. It's not what I want, it's what we need. There will be no new taxes. The legislature is probably going to have to come back to that after I leave, but here's the quote. It is crazy not to do the South Shore Rail. That's verbatim. He said, workforce, affordable housing, job opportunities cannot be unlocked without a secure transportation infrastructure, and particularly this train. I said, how do you afford it? And he said, it's going to come out of something else, I promise you that. He said they have the money, and I'm sure you know this, and some of us do, for the design, the construction, all that, the initial phase, not construction, design and all that stuff. But I could not have gotten a more unequivocal embrace of this from Strauss and him. I hope that's what happens, but I know how much it matters when you're the only part of the state, within 15 miles is it of Boston without this commuter rail? It's ridiculous. In any case, 10 and last, and then I'll take a couple of questions if you like. Obamacare. Despite what you've seen in the Congress in the last couple of days, I assume most people know it is not going away. Now, it's not just not, at least for the time being, it's not going away. Obviously, the employer mandate on the federal level is postponed for a year, but it's not going away. And as you know, it's going to start being marketed and sold, I guess, on October 1st, just a few days from now. Now, you might say, why shouldn't it go away? As Ted Cruz said, by a 10% margin. By a 10% margin, people oppose, 52 to 42 oppose Obamacare. Well, that's a good argument unless you read the next part of the poll, which says even a majority of those who oppose Obamacare don't want it repealed because they're sick of the fight. They may not be happy with it, they're nervous about implementation, they are sick, as I am and I hope you are, of this mindless, unending fighting in Washington. I've gotten to the point, I used to be really ideologically driven, and I like to think I am to a significant degree. I want any outcomes. I want product. I want outcomes that come from people I elect to go do things for me, and even if it's not the outcome I'm crazy about, I want to see motion, in any case. Now, speaking of fighting, I just got to get this out of my system. Can you get any more crass than Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, comparing critics of his position on Obamacare to appeasers of the Nazis, which is what he did. I don't care if you hate Obamacare, that to me is the worst of government and public life. And I just asked you, can it get any more crass? Yes, it can. Did you hear what the CEO of AIG said a couple of days ago? CEO, this is true, it is just surreal. These are people in public life. The CEO of AIG compared criticism of bankers' bonuses after the bailout to, quote, lynchings in the Deep South decades ago. This is the kind of, if you'll excuse the expression, crap that has got to disappear from public life. Whether it's private sector, business leaders, whether it's United States senators who are entrusted with being our leaders, all that sort of stuff. The final thing on Obamacare, and then I'm going to close, is no one who is as good a communicator, I want to get all these negatives right, as Barack Obama, has done a worse job communicating what he sees as the facts of a particular piece of legislation than he is. Marjorie Egan and I, with Emily, you know who Emily Rooney is? Emily Rooney from Greater Boston. We did a radio thing the other day. Emily's on with us every Friday. And Emily, one of the smartest people I've ever known, we're talking about how no one knows what's in Obamacare. Even the supporters don't know what's in it. Oh yeah, if I have a kid who's 24, I know, because I can keep my kid on my insurance policy until they're 26. If my mother has a pre-existing condition, I know that. Emily Rooney, who is, again, one of the smart, she says, I couldn't talk for 30 seconds about the content of Obamacare. The president has done a brutally bad job of explaining what's in it, number one. And number two, I think there's been far too much focus on covering the uncovered. And while I know we are compassionate people, and I hope we all care about the 10% are uncovered, that's not people's major concern. The major concern is of the 90% who want to be sure that any health care reform, whether it's Romney Care or Obamacare, is going to help bring down my insurance rates. That's what should be marketed here, not our compassion. And believe me, I like to think I'm a compassionate person for our fellow men and women who can't afford coverage. Finally, just so you don't think I live in a parallel universe where I think these say, oh, you just do what he said, it's so easy, everything. I don't think that at all. Go back to 1990. I mentioned that Barbara Anderson from Citizens for Limited Taxation, I hope you know her, because while, as she says, we're different genetic species, and we are, she is the real deal. She's a former housewife who is not funded, as many people accuse her of some big business cabal. She's a true believer, and in my book is the essence of what democracy should be, is a fight or whatever. In any case, she proposed this cut on the ballot, tax cut on the ballot in 1990. No one thought it could be beaten because she'd never lost. It would have been the single largest percentage budget cut on the ballot in U.S. history. We debated, she and I was hired by sort of the usual suspects, for lack of a better expression, to try, we weren't going to win, but at least let's have a fair fight. Well, we debated more than 150 times in that campaign. We had some audiences for a debate about taxes that were as big as 5,000 people. I mean, is that not what a democracy is supposed to be? The most engaged electorate. I called her the night before, I said, win or lose, I hope I win. I'm going to sleep easy because everybody in the state knows exactly what the stakes are here. In any case, 150 debates, and we did so many debates, some days 4 or 5 debates in one day. We'd drive in the same car, which no one could believe. My people hated her like you cannot believe, and her people hated me. They ride in the same car. In any case, here's what happened. Because her side always turned out better than mine. This is totally true. Every time we'd have a debate, didn't matter how well I'd go, we went out for a cup of coffee. She drank Coca-Cola, I drank coffee. After every debate, every time, somebody would walk over to the table, give her a hug, thank you for saving the taxpayers, you're so great. And I pretend like it's not bruising my ego. But it didn't matter how well I did, every night, thank you, Barb. Well, we're in Greenfield, Massachusetts. I'll never forget this night for the rest of my life. You can't go any farther and still be in Massachusetts. We did a debate. I think it was sponsored by the Greenfield Recorder or something, whatever it's called, the newspaper. In any case, we did a debate, and you know when I don't care what you do for a living, you know when you get it exactly right, you know when you have the day where everything is perfect, and you say to yourself, boy, I really did, that was for me. As it said in that movie, that was my night. It was my night. I was unbelievable. She was horrible. She may have been sick. It was unbelievable. So a guy starts to walk, we're friendless. A guy starts to walk over to the table. Totally true story. And I say to myself, I'm going to shoot myself. I have the night of my life. He's going to go thank her for saving the taxpayers. Much to my amazement, he walks over to me. She's sitting right across the table from me. He says, sir, I want to thank you for what you do. And he shakes my hand, not with one hand, but two. And I said, well, it's really nothing. I'm looking at her in the corner of my eye. He says, no, really. He says, I couldn't do what you do. And I said, well, thank you. That means a lot to me. He says, any husband that allows his wife, Barbara, to go out to save the taxpayers of Massachusetts is my kind of guy. Totally true. The point of that story is, I know how hard it is to get from idea to law to change. I really do. But the stuff you believe in, if you care enough to come here, if you care enough to get involved, I am a cup half full kind of guy in the second half of my life and believe things get done. Thank you very much, everybody. If you have questions, we have a couple of minutes, or no? If you have questions, or want to get in a fight or something? Yes, sir.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Browdy. My name's Jim.
Hi.
My name's Lincoln Andrews.
Hi, Lincoln.
And I manufacture brick. I'm the only manufacturer of brick in the state. I do contribute tremendous amounts of time to this community, as many people will attest to, and I do try to lobby to try to preserve the ability to provide jobs. However, you said you're always looking for a story. And I was one of Mark Pacheco's campaign commercials. Mark Pacheco and I are very close friends. You can see me on his front page. However, and I have had discussions about job creation face-to-face with Governor Patrick, Theresa Murray, and on down the line. But I'm stuck in a position as the only manufacturer where it is illegal for me to bid on a public job. And so what happens is that my employees are getting laid off. The product is being purchased from as far away when I'm doing a...
Is this because you're not unionized? Is that
Oh,
what
I'm union.
Oh, you are? So why are you precluded? I'm sorry.
Well, you know who cares about union?
Yeah.
No one.
Yeah, well, I would, well, I mean, you should, I don't mean to interrupt
Oh,
you,
no, go
but
ahead.
I would argue for the non-union contractors that try to get bid on jobs on the big and were precluded because of the agreement that was made, they would argue the opposite. So that's what I thought you meant. My apologies. Go ahead.
Well, you know...
So why are you cut out? I don't...
Because it's against the law for a manufacturer, for a product supplier to bid on a job. It has to go through a contractor. And so it's against the law. And so what happens to me is that I pay, you know, many tens of thousands of dollars in taxes. I would love to have the ability to pay more in taxes, but instead what happens is that because I'm not allowed to bid on a job, and either a union or a non-union contractor does it, and a union contractor doesn't care about it, then what happens is that the jobs get shipped out. Now, I've spent time lobbying and speaking with these people. I have Governor Patrick on record, because I had the same go around with the Romney administration, on record as saying that may have been the practice of the previous administration, but not of this administration. Instead, all I do is get the brush up because of one simple reason. I go in and I lobby, but nobody wants to get down to the weeds of the situation, except Mark Pacheco and Keiko Boral right now. I would like to say that she too is becoming very interested in this topic.
Well, by the way, having a bipartisan couple of supporters, and that was the first thing I was going to say to you, is a wonderful start. I should say, I'm going to give you a piece of advice, but you just can't say it came from me. Hello? And I mean this sincerely. When we had yesterday, when the governor was on, a guy called who runs a small business, and he was talking about how he was getting crushed by the state healthcare system. I don't want to go into all the details. Every time we get one of those calls, without exception, what the governor says to that person, he says, one, stay in line. I'm going to get your phone number. My staff is going to call you. But let me finish. Let me just finish. I know what you're going to say. And you know what I then recommend to that person? They call back the next month on the air to say, I haven't heard. Nothing has been done. And by the way, in those, and I'm not criticizing or praising Deval Patrick, there is nothing. You may have had individual meetings. You may have done a great job lobbying. The last thing a public official ever wants to have heard by the general population is they made a commitment to take something seriously, and they did absolutely nothing. And yesterday we had a guy who had called Deval Patrick on the radio 2 months ago, not quite as important as you. He was upset because the bathrooms at these state rest areas are only open 9 to 5. That's something you can work on over there. And they're not open 24/7. And he says, I'm a truck driver. It's pretty hard to deal with this thing. And Deval Patrick mouths to me, without, not on the air, I'm not telling tales out of school, he wouldn't mind. This guy called in last month, and that's what he's doing. The answer is you have to, if you have a just cause, and it sounds to me like you do, and you have two good champions, you have to put people on the spot, period.
One follow-up.
Yes.
I'll look around.
He's on next, second Thursday in October.
I just want to let everybody, many people who know me, know me as I'm probably the most relentless person there is. And you hear some of this laughter. Now, the problem is Governor Patrick did get called out on this because he was out in the Greenfield area promoting local jobs. And a newspaper immediately called him up and said, what's happening down with Stiles and how?
Okay, I'll make it one more deal and then I'm done. With you, I mean. Send me an email. I'm going to give you my email address. I will bring it up myself next time he's on. How's that? Fair enough? See how it works? When we talk to the media, I'm not going to make this email. You can now. You got it.
You'll find out how relentless I am.
Any other questions, people? Questions? Points of view? Yes, sir.
You interviewed Charlie yesterday, and I didn't see it, but he was calling himself when he came out as the new Charlie Baker. He's going to do it differently this time around. Did you pick up any nuances of what's going to be different, and why he'd be more electable than he was last time?
Why, more or less what?
Why he would be more electable than he was last time?
Well, first of all, Charlie Baker's a really smart guy. And he's got some decent accomplishments. A lot of people think, while there's some issues about the big dig financing, he was a very competent head of administration and finance for well and a little bit of Salucci. It's pretty hard to criticize the job he did at Harvard Pilgrim, obviously, even though some have. But with brains, I've said this to him, so it's not telling tales. With brains often comes arrogance. And I think the feeling was that Charlie was a little full of himself in the first campaign. There was a front page story in the Boston Globe. Margaret Egan and I did a radio debate with, Cahill, who were the three candidates? Cahill, Charlie, and Deval Patrick, obviously. And in the middle of the debate, Charlie slams our counter, and you can hear it on the air that he's slamming the thing. The story the next day in the Globe was, is Baker too angry to be governor? And I find him in real life to actually be totally accessible, funny, really good at interpersonal. He didn't come off that way. So I think when he says the new Charlie Baker, I think most of it is, he said, he said last night, he said 1,000,000 times, his wife Lauren, who's a terrific person, said, Charlie, I didn't even recognize you in this campaign. You weren't who you are. I don't know if that's true or not. I said to him last night, how do we know that that wasn't the real you? And the new you is the phony you. And he said, whatever. But I'll give you a couple of substantive things. He took a no tax pledge in the last campaign. He is not taking a no tax pledge now. And while I'm sure some on the right are going to savage him for that, I don't see how you can be a former business person and take any options off the table if you want to fix a fiscal situation. And I think that's all, I don't need to speak for Charlie Baker. He's not saying I'm about to raise taxes willy-nilly. He wants a full spectrum of options. So there are a couple of issues where I think he's moving his position. That's why the most symbolically important one. But beyond that, I think he means more of a change of tone and approach to the world. And he says what everybody says, from Hillary Clinton on down. He's going to do a lot more listening and a lot less talking, whatever that means. So he's on a listening tour. So I think it's more tone than it is content, because he sort of is in the Weld mold. He's pretty much, with some exceptions, a social liberal, with some exceptions. And he's pretty much a fiscal conservative, which is, by the way, what the state is and has been for a very long period of time. So that's my long-winded answer. Yes?
Do you know, have you had any conversation with the governor about Cape Wind and where that might be, or do you know anything about that? Because one of the Mass Tank and Engineering, which is right down here in Middleborough, they were going to manufacture a lot of the wind farms for that project, and then all of a sudden it was research began into an international consideration. So I just want to know.
Well, we're not in a few months, but I'm sure, I'm not sure. I assume some of you know there's an organization run, the name of which escapes me, that's run by a woman named Audra Parker, that is talking about relentless. And they're opposed to the wind farms in Nantucket Sound. And I've interviewed Jim Gordon, the head of who's been doing this for a century, and I think he's going to stay with it forever. They're getting approvals. I believe that you may know more than I, Representative. There are a few left, from what I understand, but there's tons of litigation. So if you were asking my opinion, again, Nostradamus work is not my strong suit. I think ultimately it's going to happen, but it's not immediately around the corner. And with the primary argument that's being made by the opponents, which frankly I have some sympathy to, is when you put this plan together roughly a decade ago, deep water technology was not nearly as sophisticated as it is now. You would have the ability, admittedly at some significant expense, to move these things far further out without losing a lot of the economic benefit of this thing, because it's going to be pretty costly electricity anyway, by the way, but obviously it's clean electricity. Gordon won't do that. They're not going to give up, but I think my guess is at the end of the day you'll see Cape Wind. And people, I assume, know there were some very strange bedfellows there. You had people like Mitt Romney, who opposed the project. You had Ted Kennedy, who opposed the project. You had Ted Kennedy, who was one of Deval Patrick's first and most important supporters, had his candidate support Cape Wind, Deval Patrick. So there's these odd bedfellows, but it's almost like South Coast Rail. There's going to be a Cape Wind, I think, at some point. Anything else, anybody?
One more question.
Yes. Oh, is it you?
It's me.
Go ahead.
Can I ask the last question, then I won't keep you?
Well, it's your meeting. You can do whatever you want.
Best interview, worst interview? I mean, you've interviewed so many people.
I mean, most fun for me?
Most-
Well, most fun for me, this is a horrible admission. When I was in college, I had very few posters on my wall. One of my posters was a poster of Jane Fonda as Barbarella. Now, if you're not old enough, you asked, I'm telling you. I got to interview her a couple of years ago for an hour. that was maybe one of the most exciting 60 minutes of my life. Now, I would say what may rival that. Is anybody a Breaking Bad fan? No? Oh my God. Bryan Cranston, who is the brilliant star of Breaking Bad, who is the, by the way, I don't make arts recommendations, but especially for people like you, there is a play at the American Repertory Theater in Boston, in Cambridge, it's going to Broadway. It's sold out, but there's standing room. Bryan Cranston, the star of Malcolm in the Middle years ago, Breaking Bad, he plays LBJ in this, this thing called All the Way. And it's the story of LBJ starting the night on the plane that he takes over and is sworn in, obviously, after JFK is killed, until his re-election. And most of it focuses on the beginnings of the involvement in Vietnam, but the vast majority is seeing a politician at work passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it follows Caro's book, so it's pretty respectful of history. It is the most insightful thing about how, when you're a real person, which I think he was, and love people, how you can get things done. It is unbelievable. But I was about to say, Bryan Cranston's going to be on a radio show. You don't care because you don't watch Breaking Bad on October 3rd, and I am wildly excited. Now, interesting, the other great interview, Salman Rushdie, who you would think would be the stuffiest shirt, great novelist, one of the greatest of all time, because his stuff's pretty serious, one of the funniest, most terrific guys ever. The worst interview, no, actually, there have been a few politicians, here's my view on politicians. Tell me if you disagree with this, by the way, I'm serious. It is far better to answer a question and have a position that is different from where your constituents are, if you believe it, than to dance around an issue. When you're at an event or a forum, and you don't answer, don't you think everybody in the room knows you're dancing and not answering? I wouldn't say you do this, but if you were to do this, by the way, she's been invited on my television show 2 times, she's not shown up. Is that true or not? Aren't I right? I mean, people know when you're playing. Let me give you a good example of that, and I will shut up. Ray Flynn in 1990, who was then the mayor of Boston, was dead wrong on the 2 critical issues of the day. He was pro-tax, the public was anti-tax. He was pro-life, the public was pro-choice. He was the single most popular politician in Massachusetts by far. And why? This is my estimation, because people believed that he was saying exactly what was in his heart. And he wasn't worried that this constituency is going to be angry, that constituency is going to be angry. This is who I am. Take me as who I am, and if you don't like me as who I am, then find somebody else. I find that to be the single most compelling, wonderful, alluring thing of good politicians. So the worst interviews I've ever done are politicians who are either lying or not answering questions, one of whom I interviewed last week. So if you go back, and watch last week, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure. I appreciate it. By the way, can I say one more thing? I mean this sincerely, and it's not just to you. My email is jimbrowdy@comcast.net. It's my name at comcast.net. If you have stories, if you have issues, it may take me a few days, but if you have stuff you want to pitch, if you have issues you're concerned about, jimbrowdy@comcast.net. Thank you, everybody.
Green eggs and ham. Thank you so much. A wonderful, wonderful time. Listen, 2 seconds, I just want to say. The Chamber is starting its membership campaign now through November. Every one of you knows a business owner who could benefit by having come to this event today. From our Rockland Trust Speaker Series, the education that comes with that. Because we've moved into a new space, we have room for Seed Corporation to come in and help us out, Mass Small Business Development to come in and help the business owner with any concerns or issues they have. And the thing I hear the most when people come and visit our chamber, you have the friendliest chamber. You seem to have members who want to help us succeed. And that's the difference of our chamber. And that's the other part of power of place, power of voice, power of community. I want 50 new members. Do them a favor. you make this your chamber, you increase the network, increases the opportunities for all of us. Thank you very much, Mr. Brody. Thank you, Legislative Committee. Thank you, sponsors. Thank you.